We have a dinner engagement this evening, don't we?
Hmm?
We have a dinner engagement this evening.
6:30, yeah. You know, we can't possibly cover all what's in this book, of course.
No.
All we can possibly do is hit the high spots.
Yep. Unto Mother Jones and General Chase, the old son of a bitch.
Let's remember to do a couple of, at least one walk off camera, you know, walking out of the frame so we can get to
Of everybody.
another place, yeah. You know, if you all, I don't know what you want to do with the talk, but if at some point you want to just okay. Around or, you know, if Barron wants to.
How much time do you think we have here on battery? Another half hour?
The shot is very nice.
We may end up bringing up the power supply.
End up doing what?
Bringing up a power supply for longer shooting in case our batteries all go down. We can go on to AC power for the camera. We're rolling, right?
Are we on? Well, in connection with the acts of terrorism, I think we ought to take up the matter of some of the parades that were held in Trinidad. The companies had their propaganda and their methods of getting their message across, and so did the unions. The union message in Trinidad usually took the form of parades with banners and wind up with speakers and rallying the people around. A very famous organizer had come into Trinidad named Mary Jones. She was known throughout the United States as Mother Jones. She was an old woman with white hair, dressed with a black bonnet and severe black clothing. Looked like everybody and anybody's grandmother, a kindly looking old woman, and she was full of hellfire. The companies were scared to death of her. She was brimstone when she spoke, and she had the facility of rousing the miners to support the union and to stand firm no matter how much pressure was put on them by the companies. She had been in a number of strikes throughout the United States and was very widely known. She came to operate in Walsenburg and Trinidad. And there was one very famous case when to show you how this propaganda thing worked. One day, my father received a call from Billy Diamond, who at that moment was in charge of the UMWA office in Trinidad. And he said, "Doctor, you know that Mother Jones is sick and she's out at the hospital." And my father said, "Yes, I know that." Well, he said, "I want you to take your bag." At that time, all doctors carried a bag with medicine in it. "And I want you to go out and see Mother Jones." And my father said, "Well, now, Billy, you know I can't go see Mother Jones. Mother Jones is under arrest, and she is being treated by the military physicians, and I cannot get in to see her." Billy Diamond said, "Doctor, don't ask any questions. just take your bag and go out to the hospital, go up to the second floor, and go to Mother Jones' room. So my father said, well, okay, Billy, if that's the way you want it, I'll do it. So he went out the hospital, went up the second floor. He could see the room where Mother Jones was. The door was open, and there was a militiaman with a rifle standing in front of it, in the doorway. So my father went down the corridor and approached the room, and as he approached it, a nun came from the opposite direction. The hospital was operated by the Sisters of Charity of Cincinnati. And she said, hello, doctor, can I help you? And he said, yes, I want to see Mother Jones. And she said, oh, come on, doctor, right this way. And she went over to the militiaman, and she lifted his gun. He was holding it across his arm, and she lifted it and ducked under it and said, come on in, doctor. Well, the militiaman promptly put the gun down, and my father has the gun across his chest. And the militiaman said, you can't go in here. And so my father, the old lady is in there looking very benign, and she looks as though she's dying. She was strong enough at that moment to, she wasn't sick at all, as it turned out, but she's dying, and it was a pitiful sight. So my father shouted, Mother Jones, are you all right? Are you sick, Mother Jones? Are you sick? And she said, doctor, I'm dying, I'm dying. So the militiaman pushed him back and said, you can't go in here. So my father turned away and went back to his office. The Union had prepared cartoons in advance, and these had been distributed to all sympathetic papers in the United States. The cartoons appeared throughout the United States the next morning, and the caption on top, the title on the cartoon said, this is the way they treat an 82-year-old woman in Colorado. And then the caption underneath said that she had been very ill and was denied her own physician. The cartoon showed the old lady in bed, much as she did look to my father. And it showed this brutal-looking militiaman with a heavy growth of beard on his face, and now the rifle has a big bayonet on it. And my father looks like a stage doctor, instead of just a young man. He looks like a stage doctor of the 1880s, and he's got on a silk hat and a beard, and he has this bag, and it says Dr. Beshoar on it, and the bayonet is sticking right in his stomach. Well, it was a very effective piece of propaganda. Another very effective piece of propaganda happened when the Union staged what was known as the Women's Parade. And the only way you could hold a parade at that time in Trinidad, since the town was under martial law at all times, was to get permission from the military authorities. And the man in charge of the militia at that moment in Trinidad was General Chase, a Denver physician, and a rather pompous individual of the old school. And when the Union went to him and asked for permission for the Women's Parade, he denied permission. Having denied it, the Union then, having had the permit refused, the Union promptly decided they would hold the parade. And since he denied it, then General Chase felt obligated to stop it. He drew his cavalry up in front of the post office in Trinidad on Main Street. The parade was came up Commercial Street, turned east, and came down Main Street and was headed toward the hospital. General Chase was sitting on his horse. His militiamen were on their horses. They had their sabers drawn, which they always did when there was a possibility of their going into action. And then here comes this collection. No men, women and children. The women in the long skirts of the day and their bonnets and
carrying placards.
Yeah. And as they got close, the women began to deride and yell at General Chase, and he got redder and redder in the face. And some horse manure was thrown at him, and he was provoked as much as they could provoke him. And finally, he ordered the cavalry to move forward and clear the street. This became, in the press, a cavalry charge, and the press said that General Chase's son who was there, said, "Daddy, shall I blow the bugle?" And Daddy said, "Ride down the women." Well, I don't think General Chase ever said ride down the women, but as it wound up, the cavalrymen did move against the women, swinging their sabers. And a number of the women and children were injured by swinging sabers. So the fact remains that the Union propaganda was really correct. He did use saber-swinging cavalrymen against women and children.
There are photographs of it.
Right, there are photographs. And in the midst of all the excitement, General Chase fell off his horse. And a great roar of laughter went up from the women and children. And that was the moment when the cavalrymen moved forward with their sabers to clear the street. See, now that clearing the street, and we are still talking about terror. We're talking now about both propaganda and terrorism. That clearing the street was done several times by cavalry, who would ride up on the sidewalks. They'd ride up on the steps of the post office and other places and swing their sabers and clear pedestrians off the streets. See, the town was under strict martial law.
You remember that? Do you remember the soldiers in the streets?
I remember seeing the cavalry in the streets. Indeed, I do.
That would stick in your mind.
You see, I was a small boy, and I have no memory that goes along and with any continuity. All I see are still flashes. I do see cavalrymen because, of course, at that age, the horses impressed me, and I can see them. I can see the funerals I saw the funeral of the Ludlow victims. The little white coffins of the children were put on a large dray pulled by horses, and they were taken to the Holy Trinity Catholic Church in Trinidad for the requiem, and I can see the dray moving to the cemetery. I see that. Another thing I see, the miners wore during this strike red bandanas around their necks, and they were called rednecks. Now, in the southern part of the United States, the title redneck means a farmer who's been exposed to the sun and he is a redneck. But in this instance, the red bandana worn by the coal miners that was their uniform. They were called rednecks by the opposition. At one point there, after the massacre at Ludlow, the miners took Trinidad. And my sight, the thing I see, is my father, who was a very young man. He took my mother and me in his car, open car, and he drove proudly around Trinidad. And on each corner, there stood a stalwart miner with his red bandana and his rifle. And as we drove by, they all saluted my father like a general. This was a great, proud moment after all of this intimidation by cavalry and
when was it that they took Trinidad? After Ludlow, during the 10-day war?
Yeah, they just took possession of the town for a few days. And at that time, Chase and the militia were out in Walsenburg. And of course, the regulars came in very quickly then.
But there they were posted in town.
Oh, they were posted all over town. Yeah. One of the persons you've talked to, Mr. Glenn Altman, tells the story of walking with his mother and seeing the rifles out the windows. That was at Castle Hall in Trinidad, which was the Union headquarters. And it's now, I think it's sometimes called Eagles Hall or Castles Hall. And the Union had the upper floor, and sometimes during these hostilities, miners would sit up there with their rifles, and you could see them in the windows. And I remember, as that's how we happened to be going by that hall, was, of course, my father had to show my mother the men standing around in front of the hall with their rifles, and we were in possession.
How did your mother feel about all this?
Well, my mother was a much harassed woman. When martial law was declared, all citizens were required to give up their guns. Now, this had happened in my grandfather's day, too. Trinidad has been under martial law as much, and maybe more, than any other town in the United States of America. Repeatedly during my grandfather's day, the militia would be in Trinidad in connection with industrial strife, and they would declare martial law, and all citizens would have to turn in their guns. Also, they would post a militia officer at the office of the Western Union and the postal telegraph to censor all outgoing news dispatches. My grandfather had a muzzle-loading shotgun of the Civil War period, and he kept that to always turn in to the militia. Yeah.
Had no firing pin, right?
And he always got a receipt, and then when martial law was rescinded, then he would go and get it. My father also had an old pistol which he turned in. See? And of course, the family didn't turn in their guns; these pieces they turned in. Well, about 2 or 3 times a week, the militia would come to our house, and I remember this clearly. They would come up to our house and they would knock on the door, and my mother would go and they would say, "We have a search warrant. We understand you have guns here." And my mother would say, "Well, you were here 2 days ago and you didn't find any guns, and we don't have any guns now." She would say, "I'm sorry, we have to search." So what they would do, they would come in and they'd go into the bedroom, and they go up to a bureau, and they take the drawer out, and they dump the contents on the floor, and they kick them a couple times with their feet, and then they go to the next bedroom and dump all the dresser drawers and bureau drawers. See? And they'd go to a bookshelf and just sweep the books out, you know, and look out the bookshelf. And finally, the house is in a shambles. Nothing really damaged, but just a shambles. And it'd take my mother and a hired girl a day to put it back together again, and then immediately they'd be back. Well, this went on and on and on. And,
so she didn't have any particular love for the militia?
No, she certainly did not. I should say not. And,
I mean, I was just wondering if either of your parents, or if your mom had come out of a proper family, and that all of these antics of your father and grandfather were...
My mother was right in there pitching too. Yes, she was a firebrand just as he was on this score.
Yes.
And of course, after the first 2 or 3 times with the militia, she was ready forever.
That's all it takes, isn't it?
Yeah.
One personal experience.
Yeah. If she hadn't been, they would have made her a convert immediately. Yeah.
Well, your father used to. You said he was going up the canyon towards Sopris.
Yes, indeed. He would be called out to see a sick miner or a member of a miner's family, or somebody who was in a tent colony. At all these camps, including in this canyon, and all these canyons, and all the way up the river from Trinidad, up the Picket Wire River, or the Purgatory, or the Purgatoire, whichever you prefer. Those camps strung along Sopris, Segundo, Primero, and all. The militia had powerful searchlights set up, and they had machine guns beside the searchlights, and they would play the highway, which was on the north side of the river, and they'd be on the south side of the river, and they'd play the light back and forth. Now, they were not apt to see you if you were not moving. So when my father would go on one of these drives, and I got to go with him on one, he would drive along and he would see the light beginning to come close and he would stop. And then we would sit there and he would watch the light and it's going on down the road. And sometimes they would go down and then they'd come back a little and try to take a second look. And then once they had done that and gone, then he'd speed up. And then pretty soon the light would be coming back and he'd stop. And it took quite a little while to go up the river when you were doing that, but he was never fired on to my knowledge. He had no doubt they would fire on him if they saw his car moving.
Those spotlights were great targets, weren't they?
They were great targets. My Uncle John, who incidentally was also the official dentist for the United Mine Workers of America during the strike, and all miners with dental problems came to his office. He had a beautiful 303 Savage that had escaped being turned into the militia. And one day a miner came up to his office and said, Dr. John, we'd like to borrow your 303 Savage. And Uncle John said, well, I don't know what you want with my 303 Savage. You've all got carbines. And they said, well, this is for a little special job. And we don't think our 30-30 carbines are just quite right for this. And we'd like to have it. He said, well, what for? And I said, Doc, no questions, Doc. He said, okay, take it. Well, what they did, they were up shooting out the searchlights.
There's a big long-range rifle.
It was a high-powered rifle. And they'd get up in the hills there where they couldn't be seen. That light up. See.
On and on.
These things went back and forth.
It was like that. We heard that story about the Italian with the elephant gun or something that everybody
I thought it was.
It might be the same. But guy, this was at Ludlow though, and he had some humongous rifle of some sort. Elephant gun is what they keep saying, and he could keep them pinned down. He could shoot at them from out of
their range,
out of the machine gun range,
yeah,
and just raise holy hell with them, shipping off that water tower and that kind of stuff.
He may have had an early day big caliber gun.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there were a few left around in this country. The big guns of the very early days around here were the big buffalo guns. During the great Trinidad War of 1867, the war between the Spanish-speaking population and the Anglo population, my grandfather, who had been a surgeon in the Confederate Army, saw something that he had never seen in the whole Civil War. One of the Mexican deputy sheriffs who were besieging the Americans who were in a hotel went to get some water from the river, and from a great distance, an American in the hotel, using a buffalo gun, cut his foot off at the ankle with one shot. And my grandfather said he had never seen an amputation by a rifle shot until that time.
Big
So,
Not fooling around.
I'm sure there may have been some of those left around, you see.
Those old buffalo hunters probably could have hit you at about 300 yards too. I imagine they were pretty good with those
sure.
guns.
Let me ask a question, Oliver. Are you on your second battery belt?
No, this is the first one, but it's the only one that I know that's good.
Then I have two questions. We should, before we get into the Ludlow battle itself, we have a lot of homework that we have to do. Do you want to set up the power supply? You want to do walk-on, walk-offs? You want to save some batteries for when you're up on the hillsides, right?
That would probably be best, although those hillside shots will be very brief. You know,
Yeah.
15, 30 seconds, something like
Right.
that. But we
How
should-
much
Why don't
how much longer do you want
Why
to
don't you
talk?
ship over, put the other belt on?
See
Then
if
when
it
that
works. We
gets
tried
beat,
it.
we'll
It didn't
know.
work.
Oh, it didn't work.
Put it on and it read
may
low.
have it may have just not been
Plugged all the way.
plugged in right.
See what you can do.
Camera. But, yeah,
That way we know we've got enough to
I'll
do
tell
our
you-
cutaways left in here. Unless
take
we
a
have
break.
real
Let's
bad luck.
just do a quickie on the coal while we're here.
okay,
Can we do that?
sure.
Okay, and you piece it in any place you want. Okay. As you can see, there is practically nothing left in this canyon except a few foundations and these buildings, as we discussed earlier. But now and then, if you look around, you can find a few artifacts and things that are of interest. For example, a few minutes ago, I picked up these 3 pieces. Now, here's 2 pieces of coal mined here in this Berwind Canyon. And this is a piece of coke made out of the coal of this canyon, see? And you'll find pieces of coal all through the canyon. And today, lots of young people have never seen a piece of coal. And they come up here and they pick it up and they take it home, and it's considered a great curiosity. And I've known children here in recent months who've managed to get enough to make a little fire at home and see these rocks burn. See? But the canyon is full of it. Get it? Good. Okay.
Well, let's try the other battery, because I don't want to just, to make any of this usable, we have to do a couple of walk on, walk off, establish, and all that kind of stuff. I'm worried about, see what's happening with the sun here?
We'll do the bedspread as
Do you want to do Ludlow
springs as an
elsewhere, or how
artifact
do you
too.
wanna do it? Or should we just push
We
it?
could wrap this up and we could set up elsewhere, some other, in another
Do
place.
Ludlow itself.
Yeah, we can do Ludlow.
See, I'm worried he's about to go into the sun.
Yeah.
So if we're going to do these walk-ons and everything, we better do them now.
Yeah, I think so.
We've barely begun. We got a lot of work to do
Okay,
still.
unclip your mic and put it there.
It's just one day.
Where do you want your camera to walk on?
I can't see the thing. I got it.
Tell these old guys it's just like a tie
Yeah,
clip. They laugh. That doesn't make it any easier.
You don't know it, but old men get stiff when they sit down.
Shit, young men get plenty stiff themselves.
We'll get to a conversation and he'll get him to a point where he'll say, yeah, here, I'll show you.
Okay.
I'll show you, and they used to send him down the canyons here and just get him and we'll go walk down here.
Okay. Well, if you want to,
How about we just come in this way and sit here? Here, Eric, let's just walk on here, and then what we'll do, let's do this. Eric? Eric, batteries are money. Battery. How do you want to do it, Oliver? Is this good enough?
yeah, that's fine. Why don't you just come walking over here? Yeah, it has colors in the sun. Highly prized by
Really. Highly prized by damn Pool Coal Project people to boot.
Have a seat.
Oh.
So what we should do, the other thing that we should do then is turn up the gain on a mic enough that we can I think that what we should do is have Barron one more time tell us about when the strike happened, they sent him down these canyons, and just have us just walk off frame and then sort of point down the road or something like that, and then you can get another shot of us pointing.
that's good.
Okay.
We're not talking at that time. We're just walking.
We'll just start to talk, and then
We'll
get
take
up and
these
go.
off and go and walk.
Just don't even put it on.
No, I'll just hold it.
Don't even put it on. We'll pick you up okay like that.
You mean just hold it there?
No, I got
He'll
it.
hold it.
I got it. Any audio match, huh? How
We can do it. He can wear it. You can take it off.
On your face.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
The other thing is he's had it on in the shot
Yeah.
all along.
And then you can,
Take it off.
when we tell it, you can just kind of unclip it and
Right.
you know, just say I'll show you this or something like that. Do you want to? Do you know?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll just do that to get us off the thing.
And Ron, just get up and walk out this way.
Walk this way.
Yeah.
And I'll unclip this and off we go.
Off we go.
Good. Well, that was the day of the exodus from the various camps throughout Las Animas County was a sad day indeed, as the women and children, and well, the men too at that time, had their possessions thrown out into the streets. There was some storming. Some of their possessions were ruined. They were thrown into mud and water. But down they came, down the canyon, with some pushing little carts, some carrying bundles, some had their possessions loaded on wagons. And there were a few cars, and some of them were in. Some of them had their possessions in cars. They didn't have very much because they were really poor people.
You know, it's one of those funny Colorado things that day, because we've heard, depending on which canyon you were in, it either snowed or it rained.
It's a bad day. Down the canyon. How far up does this canyon go anyway?
How does the video look?
I think one of the chief reasons we should do the book because John Lawson was so intimately connected with the research.
Oh, here, I'll get this other battery, Oliver, and we'll see if it's got anything in it.
Okay.
Baron, you just poke around in the ruins here. Get some shots of Baron.
Okay, let me do it with a stick. Poke around with a stick. Okay? Yeah. So.
Ah, it's so nice out here. It's good stuff. I can just see it all coming together.
Okay?
That's fine.
Well, I think what we ought to do is get the one from
Well, you grew up in this town and then went off and became a newspaper man, and you've written several books. How did you come to write this book on the strike?
Well, this was rather interesting. At the time I did this book, I was working for the Rocky Mountain News in Denver as a political reporter. And a union body in Denver had some extra money. and they thought that their parent union was going to take it away from them, and they thought they'd like to do something with it. They decided what they would like to do was write a story about John Lawson and the 1913-14 strike. So a committee was set up, headed by Mr. J.O. Stevick, who had for many years been active in the Pressmen's Union, and members of other unions were named to it, and I happened to be named to it because at that moment I was active in helping to organize the American Newspaper Guild in Denver. We, having set the committee up, and we had this bit of money. Sounds like awfully small money in terms of today, but we did have enough to start on a book and to get it published. We hired a very nice woman named Winifred Banner, who had had considerable experience writing as a publicist in the union field. And she was thoroughly familiar with unions, and at that time, as I remember, she was working for the State Industrial Commission, which concerned itself with unions. She agreed to write the book, and John Lawson, who was made a member of the committee, he gave her all of his papers, and other union people came in with their papers, and she had a vast collection, and she set to work. And she had been at it for some time, and she had made a great number of notes of research, original research she did, and at that moment she became ill and died. The committee held a meeting, and very sad, what are we going to do now? And suddenly somebody looked at me and said, well, you write the book. And I said, oh, I don't know how to write a book. I should say not. I'm busy working on my newspaper job, and I don't have time to write a book, and I wouldn't know how to even start. Well, none of the others had ever written anything, and finally I was just grafted to do it. At that time I was working long hours on a morning newspaper. I had a wife and 2 children. It was deep, deep, deep in the heart of the Depression. Salaries were small, and it was a real struggle to make ends meet. I think I was making I think it was $35 a week, as I remembered, and things were tough. But all of the stuff that Mrs. Banner had was sent to my house. A couple of trunk loads, a couple of filing cabinets full, and then miscellaneous stuff of all sorts. It almost filled a room, and all of her notes, which sadly enough, I couldn't read. I couldn't read her handwriting. So finally I decided I'd start from scratch. So I outlined the book, and I then finally wrote it. And I had, and there have been other books written about it, but I had one great advantage. I had John Lawson at elbow. I had Horace Hawkins, the noted attorney for the United Mine Workers, at the other elbow. And I had the assistance of Ed Doyle, who had been a member of the policy committee. And I had complete cooperation of all of these people. And so what I had as research were the first-hand accounts of men who were there. As you know, books are often written by reading what other people have written, which they got from what other people had written, and so on. But in this instance, such merit as the book has comes from the fact that it's a direct transmission from the people who were there.
Yeah.
So,
Where did you get that title?
Out of the Depths?
It's a great title.
Of course, you know where it comes from. It comes from the Bible. Out of the depths, O Lord, have I cried unto thee. And the people who lived in these canyons, they were in the depths. Yeah. Now, oddly enough, I ran into a book on one of these 25-cent bookshelves here a while back. Somebody had written years ago about some other subject. It was titled Out of the Depths.
Well.
Now, the book has been through several printings. Obviously, it's been a regional book. It has been much read in Colorado.
We found it in every miner's house.
Oh, I'm sure in every miner's house. And it has been read in every part of the country, but it is it is a regional book, not a national book.
The other big book on all of this was written by George McGovern.
Well, George McGovern did his thesis on it, and I'm sure that George McGovern would agree that he did some leaning on Out of the Depths to write his thesis. And then subsequently, a book called The Great Coal Mine War was written within the last 4 or 5 years by an author named Guthrie, who lives in Virginia, and it came out under Guthrie's name and McGovern's. Guthrie did research, and I'm sure Guthrie did the writing, and McGovern contributed his name and thesis. I'm sure that was.
Were there any revelations in that book that?
As far as Colorado is concerned, I didn't see any. No, the difference between his book and this one is he covers a much broader field. He covers not only the Colorado strike, but he covers national strikes and goes into things that Out of the Depths does not touch. This book is centered on Colorado.
The story doesn't say the story of the Ludlow or of the Great Trinidad coal strike. It says it's the story of John Lawson.
This is the story of John Lawson, and John Lawson was an exceptional character, a soft-spoken man, very slow to anger, but when he got angry, things popped. He was a mild man. He was a decent man. He was a good organizer. He loved people, and he would give his life for them. I'll tell you a story about him that I didn't know myself until years later. He lost an eye in a mine accident. I didn't know it. Then he saved his money to get himself, the eye was not completely gone, and if he had the proper medical treatment, the eye might have been saved. And he was saving money for it, to go someplace to specialists and have it treated. At that moment, a man working in the mine with him suffered an eye injury, and John Lawson gave him all of the money he had saved to save his eye, and John Lawson lost his. One time when John Lawson was arrested in Trinidad, commonly the sheriff and the police, all of whom were in the hands of the coal company, would make raids and arrest all kinds of leaders and United Mine Workers officials. So they had gathered up a big bunch of them and taken them to the county jail and the courthouse. Among those were John Lawson. Well, naturally, the union wanted to get him out on bail right away, and so they came and solicited my grandmother, Beshoar. My grandfather is now dead, but he had left her considerable property, and so they wanted her to go on the bail of these miners. Well, my grandmother Beshoar had lived a long life, and she had been in the Civil War, and this was just an incident in her life that had been a thing that had started in Kentucky and Virginia in the Civil War and through the Plains days and the Indians' troubles, and you know. Well, she said, well, now, I don't know if I want to go bail or not. And she said, now, of course, she knew her son, and both sons were mixed up in the strike, but she wasn't sure. She said she would go up to the jail and look at them. So she goes up, and they've got about 20, 25 men there, and she didn't know one of them from the other. And she walked in, and a pretty motley-looking bunch they were. And she walked in, and she looked them all over, and she said, well, I'm certainly not going to go bail for all of these men. I'll go bail for that one. And she picked out John Lawson.
So clean
and she went his
Nice
bail.
face.
Clean cut. Now, he appealed to her, and so she went John Lawson's bail.
He's a good-looking man.
It was a fine-looking man. Yes, indeed he was.
Now he didn't end up staying with the UMW after the strike. What was that all about?
Well, when the strike ended, the United Mine Workers of America had lost a lot of money. They had been beaten in the strike. they wanted to get out of it just as fast as possible, and so they deserted Colorado, and they deserted John Lawson and Ed Doyle and left them in the lurch. John Lawson was charged with high crimes of murder, arson, rebellion, all sorts of crimes. And of course, finally he was acquitted of all of them. But the Union did pull out and leave them. Subsequently, John Lawson became vice president of the Rocky Mountain Fuel Company, which was headed by Josephine Roach. And he worked there for many years. And when he was finally retired from the Rocky Mountain Fuel Company, in the 2 or 3 years just before his death, he and I worked together in the regional office of the War Manpower Commission in Denver. And our work was concerned with discrimination against minorities. We were among the first to do that type of thing, long before the this became the accepted thing.
He just swapped over, excuse me, I think we ought to either go to power or what?
That
Because
one
we're
was-
going to be out of
that's all I
batteries.